I was 24 at the time, living alone in a small but cozy house in the suburbs. It was my little haven, you know? I worked as a receptionist during the day, and sometimes I liked to go out with friends to unwind. On that particular night, I went to a bar with my coworkers to celebrate one of their birthdays. The place was crowded, full of laughter, loud music, and the mixed smells of beer and cheap cologne. I was having a good time, but I started feeling tired around midnight. I said goodbye to everyone and grabbed a cab home, already looking forward to kicking off my shoes and crashing into bed. When I got home, the street was as quiet as usual. The only light came from the street lamp outside my house, which flickered occasionally, almost like a warning. I walked through the small front yard, unlocked the door, and stepped inside. That familiar feeling of comfort washed over me, the faint scent of the lavender candle I'd lit earlier still lingering in the air. I locked the door behind me, checked the windows like I always did, and headed straight to my bedroom. My routine was simple: change into pajamas, wash my face, and, that night, collapse from exhaustion. For some reason, though, that night felt different. At first, I didn't notice it consciously, but there was this unsettling sensation, like I was being watched. I laughed at myself in the bathroom mirror, blaming the paranoia on some horror movie I'd probably seen recently. Already in bed, I scrolled through my phone for a bit, reading messages from my friends and trying to relax. Then, I remembered I'd forgotten to turn off the kitchen light. Annoyed, I got up and walked to the kitchen. The light was on, but something else caught my attention. The back door, which I always locked, was unlocked. My heart started pounding. I knew I'd locked everything. It was a habit as natural as breathing. A wave of panic hit me, but I tried to rationalize it. Maybe I was too tired and forgot, or perhaps the lock was faulty. I locked it again, double-checked it, and went back to my bedroom, convincing myself everything was fine. But that feeling of being watched returned, stronger this time. I couldn't laugh it off anymore. Something was definitely wrong. I tried to lie down and forget about it, but my body wouldn't relax. It felt like every little noise in the house was amplified. The creaking of the floorboards, the settling of the walls, even the wind outside seemed off. That's when I heard something I couldn't ignore. Footsteps. They weren't faint echoes or my imagination. These were soft, deliberate, unmistakable footsteps coming from the hallway. At that moment, I froze. I knew I was alone in the house, or at least I was supposed to be. My mind went into denial. Maybe it's just the house settling, I thought, but deep down, I knew better. Grabbing my phone from the nightstand, I turned on the flashlight. The beam trembled as my hand shook, illuminating the dark corners of the room. At first, I didn't see anything, but the silence outside the door was deafening. Then, I heard it again. The footsteps, now closer. That's when it hit me. Someone was in my house. The sound was heading straight for my bedroom. My heart pounded so loudly I was sure they could hear it. I got up slowly, trying not to make a sound, and locked the bedroom door with the key I kept in the lock. As soon as the key turned, I heard it. Heavy breathing on the other side of the door. My entire body froze, cold with fear. I didn't know what to do. I didn't have any weapons, nothing to defend myself with except an old desk lamp. Clutching my phone so tightly that my fingers ached, I opened the dialer and punched in 911, whispering my location to the dispatcher, trying to keep my voice low. Just as I finished, I heard the door handle turn. Whoever it was, they were trying to get in. I whispered into the phone, barely audible, as the dispatcher reassured me help was on the way. Then I heard something that made my blood run cold. Laughter. It wasn't loud or hysterical, but quiet and controlled, as if they were enjoying my fear. My adrenaline was through the roof, and I could feel every beat of my heart thudding in my chest. Time seemed to crawl as I sat there, waiting for any sign of help, while the figure on the other side of the door seemed to revel in the terror they were causing. After the laughter, there was silence. No more footsteps, no sounds. It was as if the person on the other side of the door had vanished, but I knew better. The fear was suffocating. I scanned the room, desperately looking for something, anything, that I could use to defend myself. My eyes landed on the chair leaning against the wall, and I thought about using it to barricade the door. But the fear of making noise held me back. So I stayed there, frozen, just listening and waiting while my body remained on high alert. Then I heard it, the faint sound of sirens in the distance. For a brief moment, hope surged through me. Maybe I was going to be okay. But before I could even take a breath of relief, I heard hurried footsteps. They weren't coming toward my bedroom door this time. They were heading in the opposite direction toward the exit. I ran to my bedroom window, careful not to be seen, and peered out into the yard, illuminated by the flickering street lamp. That's when I saw him. A man wearing a dark hoodie with the hood pulled up was running down the street. The relief I felt seeing him leave was short-lived. By the time the sirens arrived, the man had already disappeared into the darkness. When the police knocked on my door, it took me a few seconds to gather myself before opening it. I explained everything that had happened while the officers searched the house. Then one of them asked me a question that made my stomach drop. "Do you usually keep a spare key hidden outside?" My blood ran cold. Yes, I had a spare key hidden under a flower pot in the front yard. I never thought anyone would actually look for it, but now it was obvious that's how he had gotten in. Once the police confirmed the house was secure, one of them gave me a stern lecture about safety, suggesting I change the locks and never leave a spare key outside again. They assured me they would patrol the area regularly over the next few weeks. But even with their reassurances, I knew I'd never feel completely safe in that house again. That night had changed everything. I spent days unable to sleep properly, constantly feeling like I was being watched, like he might come back. To this day, I have no idea who that man was or why he did what he did. But the thought of what could have happened if I hadn't locked my bedroom door in time still haunts me. After that night, my routine changed completely. I started obsessively checking every lock before going to bed, inspecting windows, even looking under the bed like a kid afraid of monsters. The next day, I called a locksmith to replace all the locks in the house. I also installed a security camera at the front door. But no matter how much I tried to reinforce my home, the feeling of vulnerability wouldn't go away. I felt exposed, like that man could return at any moment, even though I knew deep down he probably wouldn't. A few days later, I told my parents and friends about what had happened. They were horrified, of course, and repeated the same advice the police had given me: never hide a spare key outside again. But none of them could explain the most disturbing part of it all. Why did he laugh? Why did he stand there on the other side of my bedroom door without trying to force his way in, almost as if he were waiting for something? That detail still haunts me to this day. It feels like he wanted me to know he was there, that he had the power in that moment, and that my fear was exactly what he wanted. After a few weeks, I tried to move on. I went out with friends again, but I never felt completely comfortable in bars or public places. I started watching everyone around me, scanning for familiar faces or suspicious behavior. Whenever I'm alone at home now, even the smallest noise in the middle of the night is enough to send me into full alert. I never hid a spare key outside again, but honestly, I think the lesson I learned that night was bigger than that. It was a harsh reminder of how fragile our sense of security really is. I still think about that man sometimes. Who was he? How did he know where to find the key? Was it a random thing, or was it planned? I don't know, but I do know that night left a mark on me that will never fade. I hope I never go through anything like that again, but if there's one thing I've learned, it's that real fear doesn't come from the supernatural or the unknown. It comes from knowing that someone, somewhere, chose to make you their target. And that's the kind of thing you never forget. When I was 22 years old, I moved to a new city to start my first real job. I didn't know anyone there and couldn't afford to live alone, so the solution was to find a roommate through an online group. That's how I met Connor. He seemed like a quiet guy, had good references, and his profile was straightforward. The apartment was spacious, the rent was reasonable, and he assured me he was a private person. At the time, it seemed perfect. I had my books, a single bed, and a suitcase full of clothes. All I needed was a safe place to start this new chapter of my life. For the first few days, everything seemed normal. Connor was polite but distant, the type who didn't talk much. He spent most of his time in his room or was out working. Honestly, I found it kind of a relief because I'm not much of a social person myself. My room was at the end of the hallway, with a window overlooking a small courtyard filled with dead plants. I felt oddly comfortable in that small, messy space I called my own. Little did I know, I was already being watched. Things started feeling strange a few weeks after I moved in. Sometimes I felt like my things weren't in the same place I'd left them. For instance, my phone charger disappeared for 2 days and then magically reappeared on my desk. I also noticed a weird smell in my room, like someone had been there and left an untraceable presence. I tried to convince myself it was just paranoia, maybe the stress of living with a stranger or my own disorganization. But the unease didn't go away. The creepiest part was the stuffed bear on the shelf. It wasn't mine. It came with the apartment, apparently. It was small, with shiny plastic eyes and a slightly crooked stitch on its neck. Something about it bothered me, though I couldn't explain why. Every time I looked at it, it felt like it was staring back at me. Back then, I thought I was being ridiculous. I mean, who gets paranoid over a stuffed bear? It was a Friday night when everything started making sense, or losing all sense, depending on how you look at it. I had come home from work exhausted, collapsed into bed, and fallen asleep almost instantly. Around 3 a.m, I woke up to a faint, rhythmic sound, like someone walking down the hallway. I stayed completely still, trying to hear better. The sound stopped right outside my door. My heart raced, but the door didn't open. A few minutes later, I heard the footsteps retreating to the other room. I couldn't sleep after that, but in the morning, I decided to brush it off, convincing myself it was just Connor walking around. The next morning, as I was making my bed, I noticed my pillow was slightly out of place, like someone had moved it. That's when my suspicions started to solidify. I grabbed my phone and Googled how to find hidden cameras. It felt a little paranoid, I know, but something in me said it wasn't an overreaction. The article suggested looking for objects with strange features, like tiny lenses or unusual parts. That's when I remembered the stuffed bear. It was sitting there in its usual spot, staring directly at my bed. A cold sensation ran down my spine. With shaky hands, I grabbed the bear and started inspecting it. At first, it seemed normal, until I noticed something odd about its left eye. It was slightly recessed, as if something was behind it. I grabbed a knife from the kitchen and began cutting the stitches on its neck. I can't describe the feeling when I found a small camera hidden inside the bear. My stomach churned. I tried to stay calm, but my mind was racing. Who put this here? Did Connor know? And most importantly, why was he watching me? I waited until Connor left the apartment and went straight to his room. At that moment, curiosity had overtaken fear. His door was unlocked, and as I stepped in, I was met with a chaotic mess of papers, cables, and electronic equipment. The thing that caught my attention the most was a laptop open on the desk. The screen showed a live feed of my room. I saw myself on the screen, looking at the stuffed bear. It was a moment I will never be able to erase from my memory. I immediately closed the laptop and ran out of there, my hands cold and my mind in full panic mode. I didn't know what to do after that. My first instinct was to run out of the apartment and never look back, but everything I owned was still inside, including my wallet, phone, and documents. Plus, I didn't know when Connor would return. I locked my bedroom door and tried to think of a plan, but my mind kept spinning in circles. Should I call the police? Confront him? What if he was dangerous? While I drowned in these questions, I heard the front door open. Connor was back. I knew I needed to act quickly. I tried to stay calm as he moved around the apartment, acting like nothing had happened. I heard his footsteps in the hallway and held my breath when he paused near my door. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure he could hear it. When he finally went back to his room, I gathered the courage to pack my things in silence. I stuffed everything into my backpack, leaving behind anything that made noise or would take too long to grab. As I finished preparing, I realized I needed something to protect myself in case he tried anything. I grabbed a screwdriver from the kitchen drawer and gripped it tightly. When I heard the TV in his room, I decided it was time to go. I opened my door slowly, trying not to make a sound. The living room was dark, with only the glow of the TV coming from Connor's room. My heart was in my throat, but I managed to cross the hallway and reach the front door. I was almost out when his voice echoed behind me. "Going somewhere?" he asked, his tone so calm it was even more terrifying. I froze, unsure how to respond. I turned to face him, and he was standing in his doorway, wearing that same blank expression he always had. "You went into my room, didn't you?" The tension in the room was suffocating. He took a step toward me, and I instinctively raised the screwdriver. "Stay back!" I shouted, my voice trembling as much as my hand. He stopped, tilting his head like he was trying to figure me out. For a moment, he stood still, just staring at me, as if deciding what to do. The silence was deafening, broken only by the faint sound of the TV from his room. My mind was racing, and I knew I had to get out of there before he made a move. "I called the police," I lied, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "They're on their way." His expression shifted slightly, as if processing what I'd just said. Then he gave a small, almost mocking smile and stepped back, raising his hands. "All right, if that's what you want." I didn't waste any time. I bolted out the door, running down the stairs so fast I almost tripped. When I reached the street, I realized I was crying without even noticing. I grabbed my phone and called a friend, begging them to come pick me up. While I waited, I kept looking up at the apartment window, expecting to see Connor watching me, but he never appeared. It was as if he had vanished, along with the weight in my chest. When my friend finally arrived, I got in the car and told them everything, still shaking. They suggested I go straight to the police, but at that moment, all I wanted was to get as far away from there as possible. The next day, I went to the police and filed a report. I explained everything: the bear, the camera, the laptop. When the officers went to the apartment, Connor was already gone. He left no trace. I never heard from him again, and I have no idea if he was ever caught or if he's still out there, maybe doing this to someone else. For weeks, I slept terribly, constantly imagining he might show up out of nowhere. Every strange noise at night made my heart race, and I couldn't help but check every corner of my room before going to bed. Looking back, I still don't understand why he did it, or how far he was willing to go. Maybe he just wanted to watch me, or maybe he had other plans I never found out about. What I do know is that I've never trusted roommates again. I've learned to trust my instincts and pay attention to things that feel off. And if I can offer any advice, it's this: never ignore that strange discomfort you feel sometimes, because occasionally, it might just save your life. I was 16 at the time, and honestly, my life was pretty average. We lived in a quiet neighborhood with tree-lined streets and neighbors who waved while tending their gardens. My routine was divided between school, long afternoons studying in my room, and taking my dog, Buddy, for walks. Everything seemed so predictable that the last thing I expected was for something significant to happen that summer. That's when a new family moved into the house next door. They were the typical suburban family: friendly parents, a younger daughter always playing in the yard, and a teenage boy about my age. His name was Evan. I first met Evan during a barbecue my parents hosted to welcome the new neighbors. He was odd, but not in the usual way. Quiet, with dark eyes that seemed to pierce through you. Whenever I said something, he'd stare as if he were trying to decipher every word. It made me uncomfortable, but I figured he was just shy. After that night, he started showing up more often, always finding excuses to come over to our house. Sometimes he'd approach while I was in the yard with Buddy, asking weird, random questions like if I liked storms or what my worst nightmare was. Strange, but I tried to be polite. Over time, his behavior became more unsettling. I started noticing Evan watching me through my bedroom window. My desk was near the window, and it was impossible not to feel his gaze while I was doing homework at night. Once, he stood there on the sidewalk for nearly an hour, staring directly at me. I told my dad about it, feeling awkward, and he said maybe Evan was just trying to make friends and that I should give him a chance. But it wasn't just that. There was something in the way Evan acted that made my stomach knot with unease. Then, one night, I woke up to a strange sound. It was a soft creaking noise, like my bedroom door was being opened. My heart started racing so fast that I could hear it in the silence. I opened my eyes slowly and saw a shadow standing near my bed. As my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I realized it was Evan. He was there, with a smile on his face and a knife in his hand. It wasn't just any knife. It was a large hunting knife, shiny as if it had just been sharpened. I wanted to scream, but fear had me paralyzed. I'm not sure how long I stayed frozen, but it felt like forever. Evan didn't say anything. He just stood there, looking at me like he was waiting for something. When I finally managed to catch my breath, my first instinct was to scream, but he raised a finger to his lips and made a low shh sound. That was enough to freeze me all over again. I could feel the sweat dripping down my forehead, and my hands were trembling so much that I could barely grip the blanket. Finally, summoning every ounce of courage I had, I let out a desperate scream. My scream echoed through the house, and within seconds, I heard hurried footsteps in the hallway. My dad burst into the room, and the lights came on. Evan took a step back but didn't run. He just stood there, still holding the knife, with a blank expression on his face. My dad charged at him without hesitation, while my mom called the police, yelling instructions for everyone to stay safe. Evan was quickly restrained, but his gaze never left mine. It was as if he were in a trance, completely detached from the chaos around him. The police arrived in less than 10 minutes. Neighbors, drawn by the commotion, started coming out of their houses, trying to figure out what was happening. Evan was taken away by the police without resistance. But the strangest part was how he looked at them. He seemed more curious than scared, like he was just participating in some kind of experiment. My dad tried to talk to me after things calmed down, but I was in shock. I could barely process what had just happened. After that night, we learned more about Evan. The police found disturbing things in his room, creepy drawings, lists with names of people in the neighborhood, including mine, and more knives hidden away. His parents seemed genuinely horrified and insisted they had no idea he was capable of something like that. However, they moved out a few days later without leaving a trace. For weeks I had trouble sleeping. Every noise in the middle of the night made my heart race, and I avoided going near my bedroom window. Even now, years later, the memory of Evan's smile still haunts me. After Evan was taken away, life in the neighborhood completely changed. What used to be a quiet, trusting community became a place filled with suspicion and fear. People started installing security cameras, reinforced locks, and motion sensor lights. As for me, I could barely feel safe inside my own home. The image of Evan standing next to my bed, holding that knife, kept replaying in my mind every time I closed my eyes. My parents even considered moving, but they ultimately decided we should try to get through it together. For months, I went to therapy to deal with the trauma. The therapist said it was normal to struggle after something so extreme, but nothing could prepare me for the nightmares I had almost every night. In the dreams, Evan always came back, darker and more determined, and I could never scream or move. It was like reliving that moment, but without the relief of my family's intervention. The worst part was waking up and staring at my window, half expecting to see his face watching me again. I knew he wasn't around anymore, but the fear was uncontrollable. Over time, things started to calm down, but some questions were never answered. Why did Evan choose me? Why did he have that blank, disconnected look, like he wasn't fully there? The police said he had no criminal record or signs of severe mental illness. It was as if his behavior had come out of nowhere. To this day, I don't know if something triggered it, but the mystery is almost as disturbing as the event itself. It's been a few years since that night, and my life has gone back to normal, at least on the surface. I returned to school, started hanging out with friends again, and even managed to sleep with the lights off. But the experience left a permanent mark on me. Now, every time I meet someone new, I find myself analyzing every detail of their behavior, looking for signs of anything unusual. It's not something I do by choice, but out of instinct. Sometimes, I still think about Evan and what might have happened if I hadn't screamed that night. Maybe he just wanted to scare me, or maybe something far worse was about to happen. I'll never know for sure, but one thing is certain: I'll never look at neighbors the same way again. I've always been a creature of habit. Every day, before heading to work, I'd stop at the same coffee shop, grab my vanilla latte with oat milk, and sit in the corner by the window. It was my favorite part of the morning. A few moments just for myself before the chaos of the office began. The coffee shop was small and cozy, with dark wooden furniture and the constant aroma of fresh coffee. I never paid much attention to the baristas. I'd just smile politely and go about my day. But then he started working there. His name was Kevin. At first, he seemed like any other barista, a guy in his early 30s with scruffy brown hair and a faint 5 o'clock shadow. He was friendly, like anyone trying to earn good tips. After a few weeks, he started memorizing my order. At first, I thought it was convenient. I'd walk in, and he'd immediately say, "Vanilla latte with oat milk, right?" I'd smile and say, "Yeah, thanks." But his enthusiasm for knowing my order started to feel unsettling. He didn't just know what I drank. He noticed the time I arrived, where I liked to sit, even the days I wore my hair tied back. One day, when I picked up my cup, I noticed something different. Beneath my name, written in slightly crooked handwriting, was the phrase, "Hope your day is as sweet as you." I thought it was odd, but tried to brush it off. Maybe it was just something he did for everyone. The next day, another message. "Your smile brightens my shift." Okay, that was too much. I started feeling exposed, like my routine, my safe space, had been invaded. Kevin was always polite, but there was something about the way he looked at me, like he knew more about my life than he should. I decided to switch coffee shops. The next morning, I pulled up Google Maps, found another cafe in the neighborhood, and went there instead. It wasn't as cozy as my usual spot, but the coffee was good, and the atmosphere felt neutral. For a few days, I felt relieved. No notes, no lingering stares. I started to relax, thinking the problem was solved. But on Thursday night, as I walked to my car in the office parking lot, I noticed something strange. My windows were fogged up, as if someone had breathed on them. When I got closer, a chill ran down my spine. On the driver's side window, written with a finger, were the words, "Miss me?" I froze. I looked around, searching for someone, any sign that this was some kind of bad joke. The parking lot was nearly empty except for a security guard in the distance, distracted by his phone. My heart was pounding so hard it felt like it could be heard outside my chest. Who had done this, and how did they know which car was mine? I couldn't think of anything else except getting in my car and driving away as quickly as possible. But the feeling of being watched stayed with me, the entire drive home. When I got home, I locked every door and window. I paced around the house, peeking through the curtains, trying to convince myself it was just a coincidence, that I was overreacting. Maybe it was just some stupid prank, someone who'd seen my car parked in the same spot every day and decided to mess with me. But a part of me knew it wasn't that. The handwriting, even though it was just a smudge on the glass, felt so familiar. I remembered the notes on my coffee cup and felt my stomach sink. Could it really be him? The next morning, I went to work as usual, but I parked in a different spot and searched for an even more distant cafe. The day dragged on, my mind torn between fear and anger. Why would someone do this? After work, I checked the window from my office before heading down. My car looked fine, no writing on the glass this time. But as I got closer to unlock the door, I noticed a small envelope tucked under the windshield wiper. My name was written on the front, in that same crooked handwriting that was now impossible to ignore. I didn't have the courage to open it right there. I got in the car, immediately locked the doors, and drove straight home. I opened the envelope at my kitchen table, my hands shaking. Inside was a small piece of paper, folded several times, with a single sentence written on it. "You can't avoid me forever." My blood ran cold. This wasn't just about discomfort or strange coincidences anymore. This was a warning, a reminder that he knew where I was, where I went, and that he could reach me anytime he wanted. I took a deep breath, trying to decide what to do. I knew I had to tell someone, but who? How could I prove this wasn't all in my head? That night, I barely slept. Every little sound felt amplified, and I was certain I'd hear someone trying to break into the house at any moment. I felt completely helpless. In the morning, I called a close friend and told her everything, from the messages on the coffee cups to the note on my car. She was shocked but didn't hesitate. "You need to go to the police." Deep down, I knew she was right, but I was terrified of not being taken seriously. Who would believe a story like this? Still, I decided to give it a try. At the station, the officer who took my report seemed interested but skeptical. I made sure to bring the note as evidence, and he kept it along with a detailed description of Kevin. He said they'd file a report, but he made it clear that without a direct threat or something more substantial, it would be hard to take further action. Stay vigilant and avoid interacting with him. If anything else happens, let us know immediately. While I had hoped for something more decisive, at least there was now an official record. But it didn't ease the knot in my stomach. Over the next few days, I took every precaution I could. I changed my routes, stopped going to predictable places, and even considered installing cameras at home. But to my surprise, nothing else happened. No notes, no messages. It was as if he had vanished. Slowly, I started to relax, hoping that maybe going to the police had been enough to scare Kevin off. Still, the fear lingered in the back of my mind. Every time I parked my car or walked through an empty lot, I felt a chill, bracing for the worst. Now, months later, I can say things have mostly gone back to normal, but I've never felt completely safe again. I never returned to that coffee shop, and the habit that was once such a simple part of my routine now feels like a vulnerability I can't afford. Sometimes I still glance over my shoulder or double-check the locks before bed. I don't know what happened to Kevin, and maybe I never will. I just hope he found someone else to fixate on, because honestly, I don't think I could go through this again. I've never been one to overshare about my personal life, you know? I always preferred to post light stuff, travel photos, makeup tips, things that made people smile as they scrolled. But in 2022, when my profile really started taking off and I hit 100,000 followers, things changed. I found myself posting more often, trying to keep up engagement. Everything had to be perfect. The lighting, the angles, even the reflections in my sunglasses. Back then, I lived alone in a small but cozy apartment on the top floor of a building with a great view of the city. It was the perfect backdrop, but little did I know, it would also become the stage for my worst nightmare. The first time I noticed the shadow follower was during a live stream in early May. I was doing a skincare tutorial and casually reading the comments while applying a serum. That's when I saw the username @iSilentEyes pop up repeatedly. They had liked every recent post, almost the second I uploaded it. But what really caught my attention was their comment on the live. "Love the new curtains." I froze. My navy blue curtains were new. I'd put them up just the day before, and I had never shown my living room in any of my posts. I shrugged it off, thinking maybe I had mentioned the curtains somewhere and just didn't remember. Influencers do that sometimes, casually letting small details slip. But after that, the comments got weirder and more specific. One day, I posted a boomerang of my outfit in my bedroom mirror. Within seconds, I got a direct message from @iSilentEyes. "You should keep the bathroom door closed. It shows everything." They were right. In the mirror's reflection, you could see the bathroom door slightly open with a towel hanging on it. I deleted the post immediately, but the uneasy feeling stayed with me. Things escalated when I started getting messages referencing parts of my life I had never shared online. One said, "That bakery on the corner has the best bagels, doesn't it?" I went to that bakery nearly every morning, but I'd never posted about it. That's when it hit me. This wasn't just someone stalking my profile. They were stalking me. I became paranoid after that last message. I kept mentally reviewing every place I'd been, every little thing I had posted. Was someone following me? But I didn't notice anyone suspicious around, no strange faces at the bakery or on the streets. To feel safer, I cut back on Instagram posts and started using filters to blur out any background details. But it didn't work. The messages kept coming, and they got even more specific. One said, "Love the green mug. Coffee or tea today?" It was the mug I'd been drinking from that morning, one I'd never shown online. I decided to share all this with my best friend Rachel during a video call. She's the practical type who always has a solution for everything. When I told her about the messages, she brushed it off, saying, "It's probably someone you know in real life. Just stop posting for a few days and see if it stops." So that's what I did. For a whole week, I went completely offline. No stories, no photos, not even liking or commenting on other profiles. During those days, I started to relax, thinking Rachel was right. But on the 5th day, while I was washing dishes, another message came through. "The silence is nice. I can hear your playlist from here." I didn't know whether to scream or cry. At that moment, I realized it didn't matter whether I posted or not. They were watching my life in real time. I looked around my kitchen, searching for an explanation. My phone was on the counter, face down. The windows were closed, the curtains drawn. Still, I turned off all the lights and ran to my bedroom, locking the door behind me. My heart pounded and my mind raced with questions. How did they know? Where were they? After a sleepless night, I knew I had to take action. The next day, I spent hours reviewing every post I'd ever made, looking for anything that could have given away my location. That's when I noticed a pattern. In nearly all my photos, there were small reflections, windows, mirrors, even the screen of my laptop. Nothing obvious, but if someone paid close attention, they could piece together key details about my apartment and even the buildings around it. It was like a puzzle I hadn't realized I was building, and now someone was using it against me. After realizing this, I went into full panic mode. My entire profile was an open map of my life. I spent hours deleting photos, removing old stories, and scrubbing anything that might give away more information about where I lived. At the same time, I started researching digital security. I blocked @iSilentEyes, but it felt as pointless as locking a door when the windows were already wide open. They knew where I lived. Blocking them wouldn't change that. That night, something happened that made me realize the problem was even worse than I thought. I was in the living room, watching TV, trying to distract myself, when I noticed a faint light outside my window. It wasn't the TV's reflection. It was coming from outside. I turned off the lights and stayed perfectly still, heart pounding in my chest. Peeking through the curtain, I saw a dim light blinking in intervals, like from a camera. Down on the street, a car was parked, and someone inside was holding a phone, aiming it at my window. I froze. For several minutes, I couldn't move, just staring at the blinking light as it disappeared and reappeared like they were taking photos. Finally, I grabbed my phone and called Rachel, whispering into the receiver. "Someone's outside watching me. I think it's him." She tried to calm me down and insisted I call the police, but I hesitated. What would I even say? That a creepy Instagram follower was taking pictures of my window? It sounded absurd, even though it was real. That night, I slept on the bathroom floor with the door locked. Every tiny noise, every shadow passing through the cracks in the door sent my heart racing. When the sun finally came up, I made a decision. I couldn't live in constant fear. I had to confront this somehow, even if it meant exposing myself further. I decided to install cameras at my apartment's entryway and balcony. I also contacted a digital security expert to help scrub any trace of my location from the internet. The cameras were installed 2 days later. I became obsessive, checking the footage every half hour, looking for anything suspicious. During one of those checks in the middle of the afternoon, I saw something that made my stomach drop. On the camera pointed at the front door, there was a white envelope carefully placed on the ground. It hadn't been there earlier. I ran to check the peephole, but the hallway was empty. Gathering every ounce of courage, I cracked the door open just enough to grab the envelope and slammed it shut, locking every bolt. Inside was a single photo. It was a selfie I'd taken in my bedroom mirror, but there was something terrifying about it. In the reflection of the window behind me, someone was standing outside, staring directly at me. It was as if they had been there the whole time, watching my every move. On the back of the photo, a shaky handwritten message read, "You finally noticed me." That was the breaking point. I immediately called the police and handed over everything: the messages, screenshots, the photo. Officers came to my building and questioned the neighbors, but no one had seen anything unusual. They reviewed the building's security footage, but there was nothing identifiable. The only clue was the car I had seen parked on the street, but it didn't show up on any recordings, as if it had been erased, or as if it had never been there at all. I knew I couldn't stay. A friend helped me move to a new apartment within weeks, and I deactivated all my social media accounts. It was hard to leave behind everything I had worked for, but the relief of not feeling watched was worth it. To this day, I don't know who I Silent Eyes was or how they knew so much about my life. Sometimes, though, when I'm alone, I get this creeping feeling, like someone is still watching, waiting for me to slip up. Maybe it's just my imagination, or maybe they're still out there,